Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History.
It brings beauty into our lives. It clothes us. It nourishes us. And it just feels good between your toes. A lot of good comes out of the soils of Alabama. The flowers we enjoy, the cotton we wear, the foods we eat. They all depend on good old dirt. Those closest to the land have an abiding knowledge that this wondrous resource of our Mother Earth is more than simply dirt. With biblical calling, man has long toiled by the sweat of his brow to work the soil and bring forth the fruits of creation. Today, the ways of modern society tend to separate us from close contact with the land. Thus removed, we often take the miracle of soil for granted. Hi, I'm Doug Phillips. In this program, we're going to journey across Alabama and get a down and close look at Alabama soils and how they contribute to the quality of our lives. And along the way, we're going to consider how we can contribute to the quality and the conservation of our soils. This program is about a land unknown to many people, a land that in many ways has maintained its native natural wonders, a place of bountiful backcountry, forests, streams, and wildlife more diverse than can be found in much of the inhabited world. Come along with me as we explore the wild wonders of this land. Come along as we discover Alabama. Welcome to Discovering Alabama, and welcome to Sand Mountain. We're up here in a little Sand Mountain vegetable garden not far from the town of Crossville. Vegetable crops are a big item in this part of the state. Maybe you've heard of the famous Sand Mountain tomatoes. Naturally, it's the soil that's the fertile ground for the tomatoes, cabbage, corn, soybeans. Agriculture, which includes the timber industry, contributes billions to the state's economy. And that's just one aspect of the value that soils bring to our lives in Alabama. Soils contribute to the uniqueness of Alabama in many ways. Consider our state amphibian, the Red Hills salamander. This fascinating creature of the Red Hills region of Alabama exists nowhere else in the world. And if not for the special sediments and soils in which he makes his home, he would cease to exist in this world. Alabama the Beautiful traces its very beauty directly to its soils. A coastal plain pitcher plant bog, a picture-perfect patch of mountain wildflowers, a stately stand of South Alabama longleaf pine, a venerable North Alabama hardwood forest. They all thrive in and depend on Alabama soils. There are 7 major soil areas in Alabama, and in this program we're going to take a journey across the state to visit each and every one of them. Here on Sand Mountain, we're in the Appalachian Plateau, which in addition to Sand Mountain includes Cumberland, Lookout, Chandler, and other smaller mountains. Along with the Appalachian Plateau, Alabama's 7 major soil areas include the limestone valleys and uplands, the coastal plain, the Piedmont Plateau, the Blackland Prairie, the major floodplains and terraces, and the coastal marshes and beaches. Within each of the 7 different soil areas in Alabama, we'll find several soil series. A soil series is a grouping of soils with similar properties, such as color, texture, the arrangement of levels, and depth to bedrock. And usually a soil series is named after a local town or landmark. Here in southeast Limestone County, for example, we're in the limestone valleys and uplands, and this is a sample of the soil of the Decatur series. There are 370 unique soil series throughout Alabama. Understanding these many varieties is just one way scientists may see soils a bit differently than you and I.
This is a soil profile, a cut through the soil. The layers in the soil, first of all, are called horizons. A pedologist, a person who classifies and studies soils and their genesis, would break it up even finer. They might call this the A horizon, that uppermost portion that we often think of as a topsoil. But then below that you get a series of B horizons, and there are at least 3 in this case, this one here, and then maybe a couple more down below us. But eventually you'll reach a point where you reach the original parent material or something very similar to it, which you would call a C horizon.
This particular site revealing the Decatur series soils is also an example of how society can rearrange the landscape. We're able to see the Decatur series soils here because this site was exposed when a borrow pit was dug for soil to use in construction on the interstate. But if we're going to crisscross the state, we'll need good roads, won't we? For as long as humans have trod upon the earth, they have moved and rearranged the earth.
We have a civilization today is because we stopped becoming hunters and gatherers and became farmers and fishermen, and started using the land so we could build a civilization, our cities. But for the first 2 or 3 thousand years of civilization, we exploited the land. There was no such thing as research. We took what we could get from it, and we know the stories of ancient civilizations that exploited the land to the point that it would no longer grow crops. In fact, there are places in North Africa, in the Middle East, where they've become deserts.
Driving across Alabama today, you might find it difficult to imagine that our part of the world has also experienced periods of extensive soil erosion. Yet there was a time when things were very different than we see today. A time when our young state had exploited much of its natural resources to supply raw materials for a growing nation. By the early 20th century, large areas of forest had been wholly stripped from the Alabama landscape. This, combined with the farming practices of the time, particularly from decades of widespread cotton farming, had left much of the state's land suffering from extreme erosion and loss of the organic matter so vital to healthy soils. By the 1920s and 30s, federal and state government began to take a more active role in research and in developing policies to help farmers avoid mistakes of the past.
The Soil Erosion Service actually grew out of the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was started to battle severe soil erosion and conservation problems across the country, and that grew out of a Depression area and the Dust Bowl era. Then the name was changed to the Soil Conservation Service, and then in 1994 Congress reorganized the U.S. Department of Agriculture and changed our name from Soil Conservation Service to the Natural Resources Conservation Service.
Today, federal, state, and local agencies, along with universities, continue to play an important role in maintaining healthy soils.
Soil and Water Conservation Committee is a committee of state government that was created in 1939. We've been around over 60 years. And our job is to work with the soil and water conservation districts throughout the state. We have 67 soil and water conservation districts.
There is a soil and water conservation district in each county. Each one of them is administered by a 5-member supervisory board, usually made up of farmers or commissioners or something within a district.
Local conservation districts are vitally important to the conservation delivery system. The conservation districts are the grassroots element. They decide what their priorities are. They identify what the major concerns are in that conservation district in the local county.
Here in Tuscaloosa County seems an appropriate place to consider a soil known as the Bama series. The Bama series gets its name from the state, not from the university, and is in fact the Alabama state soil.
And it is a coastal plain soil. So it developed in sediments that have been eroded from one place and then reworked by oceans and deposited in another, and then began its soil development. But it's also a red soil, has a fair amount of clay in it, and is a fairly productive soil, a very productive soil.
Bama soils occur in 26 counties in Alabama, mainly in the western and central parts of the state, paralleling major river systems. They consist of very deep, well-drained, permeable soils formed in thick beds of loamy sediments, and are suitable for both agricultural and urban uses. So what exactly is it that makes our Alabama soil such a valuable natural resource? Well, if you'll look closely, closer, no, really close, it's alive. Good soil comprises a mix of mineral and organic matter together with various gases and liquids, including water. And these physical and chemical properties are the matrix for a complexity of biological properties.
The soil microorganisms and the soil biology, that is pretty much our soil's immune system. So any kind of diseases, pests, whether they're natural or introduced, if you have a biodiverse soil, you have more chances in there to have an organism that may be able to fight any sort of disease or pest. And most of the problem will be with natural pests, more than likely.
In a handful of healthy soil, there are thousands of protozoa, millions of helpful bacteria, and miles of microscopic strands of fungi. Some experts claim there are more different kinds and species of organisms in a shovelful of rich garden soil than there are above ground in the entire Amazon rainforest. Now, that sort of gives a different perspective to what pop society sees as dirt. The Bama series accounts for around 360,000 acres of the state, but that still leaves us more than 32 million acres to visit, so we better get going. So far, we visited 3 of Alabama's 7 major soil areas: the Appalachian Plateau, the limestone valleys and uplands, and the coastal plain. As we head to the Piedmont Plateau, it might be a good time to reflect on what I find to be one of the most interesting uses of Alabama's native soils. Few opportunities are more fulfilling than those that help young minds explore the wonders of the land, as we experienced on this field trip earlier in the year.
See this yellow right there? Red one. That is a mosquito. Oh, it was white and crawling around. Yeah. Termite! What's a termite? We only have 11. There are lots of roots. Put that in there.
Well, I think the lesson and the thing I want you to realize is that dirt ain't dirt. In the classic sense, huh? Most of the modern society thinks of dirt as dirt, oh, icky dirt or whatever. But you just found out that in rich soil, it's quite alive, huh? And I think the big message I want you to get out of this today is, this is, in large part, the basis of life on Earth. And all the minerals and nutrients there from which the plants grow, and then we depend on the plants and the animals do as well. That's the bottom line of the producers of life, along with the sunlight. And then when things die, this is Mother Nature's recycler. The organisms in there that decompose life and recycle it back to another usable form again. Learning from the soil can grow a lifetime of opportunity.
I'm a firm believer that the earlier you start training youngsters in conservation measures and giving them information and ways of doing things that conserve our natural resources, then the more effective that they will be.
There was a time when you could assume that that student knew a lot about the soils or the crops or the animals that we were working with. You can't make that assumption anymore because they're from the urban areas, the big cities, and so it's starting with the basics. But what I have discovered in my teaching experience, though, is that the students from the city are very much interested in our natural resources, how to manage those, and they're very excited about it.
The environmental field has a lot of different areas that you can study: air quality, water quality, soil quality. So that's why I chose this area, and also I wanted to be in an area that had a purpose. And I feel that working to preserve the environment is something that would be rewarding to me.
We like to raise the awareness of how important soil is in the lives of all of us. We tend to take it for granted, so we use a number of things, bookmarks, educational tools, to get to the children. We have articles in magazines, newspapers, any kind of thing to make people aware of the significance of soil.
As we drive into Auburn, Alabama, we're entering the southernmost region of the Piedmont Plateau. Like Alabama A&M, Auburn is a land-grant university, and another good place to find some of the folks involved with soil research and conservation throughout the state.
The Soil Quality Institute is a part of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we are stationed on campus with the Agricultural Research Service at Auburn University. And what we try to do is take the research that is done at these major institutions and by other entities and even private groups and take that down to the farm level.
Just above Auburn, we encounter landscapes of the Piedmont Plateau. And what's so unique about the soils of the Piedmont?
The most distinguishing characteristic about the Piedmont is a kind of rocks that it is formed from. When you look at the other physiographic regions in Alabama, they're usually made up of unconsolidated sediments, clays and sands, or sedimentary rocks, limestone. But the Piedmont province of Alabama is formed from metamorphic or igneous rocks. And one of the most distinguishing things that you see when you walk in the Piedmont and you look down at the ground is you see mica. And that's the stuff that shines like little mirrors on the soil surface. So anytime you see mica, a little stuff like this, you know that that is derived from the Piedmont province here in Alabama.
From the Piedmont, we'll head back across Alabama to experience a special area within the East Gulf Coastal Plain, known as the Blackland Prairie, often referred to as the Black Belt. Here we find rich farmland, lush pasture land, and abundant timberlands. Ironically, perhaps, here in the vicinity of the Black Belt, we find a large area of white earth. This is the Selma Chalk. The Selma Chalk is the sedimentary remains of fossilized microscopic creatures from ancient seas that once flowed over this part of Alabama. In every Alabama soil area, the underlying geology contributes to local soil characteristics, and here in the upper coastal plain, these unique sediments serve to hold surface organic matter, thus helping to produce the rich black soils from which the Black Belt draws its name. In some places, the outcroppings of Selma Chalk may resemble snow-capped mountains, but then they can also remind us of Alabama's snowy white beaches. As we head south towards the Gulf Coast, we'll traverse two more of Alabama's major soil areas. We would not necessarily have to head south to find the soils of the major floodplains and terraces. As you can guess from the name, this soil area follows the major rivers of Alabama. Soils of this area are derived from alluvium deposited by the streams. Typically, the land is ripe for cultivated crops on the nearly level terraces and bottomland hardwood forests on the floodplains. In the floodplains of Alabama's major rivers is also where we can find the largest portion of the state's wetlands. These richly diverse habitats depend upon the unique qualities of wetland soils, a variety of specially adapted soils that help our wetlands filter out pollutants that wash from surrounding watersheds. The soils here in the coastal marshes and beaches area are found on level bottomlands and tidal flats along the Mobile River, Mobile Bay, and the Gulf of Mexico. and are the smallest of the 7 major soil areas in Alabama. Like the mountains, valleys, and prairie lands further north, Alabama's lower coastal plain has its own special appeal. Here in the vast Mobile-Tensas Delta, for example, we find Alabama's soils nurturing great bottomland forests that, together with adjoining marshes and beaches, host an array of flora and fauna. Here in the coastal region, as we near the end of our journey across the state, we are reminded of how modern society continues to bring change to the land, often in pursuit of a style of life and a pace of life that is increasingly removed from a fundamental basis of life, the soil. Rapid development in our coastal area is but one example of the kind of change that is happening on much of the soil throughout the state. And it's cause for concern among many of the folks who understand the value of this important part of Alabama's natural heritage.
Well, one of the things we need to think about is that we still need food. And certainly we want to be sure that we either designating what I would call agricultural land for crop production. And of course we need our best land for that, our Class 1, Class 2 lands for that. And we need to be very careful that we do not grow a house where we should be growing plants.
I think the thing that's most important people should remember about soil is it is a very valuable resource. I know we get our food from it, we live on it, it cleans our waste, we do lots of things to soil. We have a lot of farmland conversion happening in Alabama where important farmlands are being converted to urban uses.
Soil is the natural material that we live on. We use it for all aspects of our lives. It produces our food, it produces the fiber that we use for clothing, produces our building materials with respect to trees. It also cleans our water and it cleans our air through the plants. So it provides a lot of services to man other than just something to walk on.
I would say to the population of Alabama that we all need to form partnerships with each element of our society to work to improve the quality of air, the quality of water, the quality of wildlife and plants. And this in itself will improve the quality of life for us, the inhabitants of Alabama.
It's been a long ride covering Alabama's 7 major soil areas. We've gotten a brief glimpse of the Appalachian Plateau, the limestone valleys and uplands, the coastal plain, the Piedmont Plateau, the Blackland Prairie, the major floodplains and terraces, and the coastal marshes and beaches. 7 major soil areas, 370 different soil series, each with its own intricate mix of properties. But the significance of soil is more than its physical, chemical, and biological attributes. The real significance of soil is in its function as a living organism in symbiosis with the plants, insects, and animals, and in providing that miraculous sustenance of our earth from which life springs and to which life returns. At a fundamental level, the soils of Alabama sustain our bodily flesh and mind, the vessels of the soul. And more than that, enrich us spiritually with the grand wonders of land and nature we call Alabama.
This program is supported by grants from the Solon and Martha Dixon Foundation, the Alabama Wildlife Federation, working for wildlife since 1935, Legacy, Partners in Environmental Education, and the Robert G. Whaley Charitable Trust.